Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar, our third or fourth now in this series. Tonight, we'll be looking at TAEASS402B Assess Competence. This is the logical next step to what we started last week, which was about participating in assessment processes. Obviously, tonight's information will jump ahead a little bit of where we are at from a classroom perspective because we didn't get to do last Saturday. So even though the information train today will be a station ahead of maybe where we're up to physically with our work, come Saturday morning, we'll try to catch up a little bit, and then over probably in a fortnight, we'll try to take care of that and catch up completely. So tonight, we're going to have a quick overview of some of the topics that we went through last week, and this particular presentation will recap some of the information from that second webinar that you guys watched from last year's presentations and the one that we didn't present. So if we do have, I haven't had a look at who the attendees are tonight, by the way. Oh yeah, cool. When we look at for the guys who will be joining a little bit later on, the new people, yeah, you'll be able to sort of go through and the presentations and catch up to where we're up to. So again, obviously, I can do a little bit of a recap. Hopefully, you watched last week's presentations, and as a result of that, you'll still have a bit of relevance. But I plan to cover that stuff on Saturday morning anyway, just in the physical presence, so we have a better understanding, and I can make sure that everyone is on the same page in regards to that. So tonight we'll have, like I said, a recap on an assessment plan. Again, it feels funny wanting to talk about a recap when I didn't actually get to deliver that information to you in the first place, but we certainly will go through that recap plan, and like I said, and I will address it again on Saturday. Look at process and procedure, and then we're going to have a look at within this assess competence, what are the different assessment tools and when we apply them, and then a Q&A. So with a bit of luck, there's only about 48 slides in tonight's presentation, which isn't too bad. We should get through this one. There is actually a second presentation to assess competence, so we'll see how we go tonight and work out whether or not we want to redo the next one tomorrow night, or once again you watch the recorded one from last year, or like I said, or I'll present it actually on Saturday. So I'll open that up to you guys that are here tonight, and we'll see what's going on. So with nothing further to do, once again, let's move on. So Chapter 1, recap on an assessment plan. So again, just to orientate us, last week we started to think about how what assessment's about and how we start to go about creating an assessment process. And a part of that assessment process is going to be working with and creating an assessment plan. Assessment plans are templates that we fill out. So it's a pre-formatted template. We fill that out, and it gives us an assessment plan, which, as a direct result of its name, provides us with direction, benchmarks, and benchmarks, and I guess checkpoints to make sure that we're creating assessments that are going to do their job, assess what they're meant to assess, and allow us to have clients create enough evidence that we can deem them hopefully competent in whatever we are assessing them in. So assessment is the process of gathering evidence which will enable qualified assessors to make a judgment about whether a candidate's demonstrable skills, attitude, and knowledge meet specific competency requirements. It is a process whereby a judgment is made about a candidate's competence. Now, the great thing is I sent you guys out some little questions in that last week and today, and I know you're all on the right track with that, which is awesome. Competence refers to the ability of an assessment candidate to perform a discrete task or series of tasks under specified conditions to an agreed standard. Generally speaking, for us, in our world, we're talking that agreed standard is going to be a unit of competence if you're working within a RTO or TAFE college, delivering qualification-based education and awards. So people are going to get proper certificates, and 99% of the time, or virtually 100% of the time, we're going to be dealing with units of competence. Obviously, if we're training within a workplace, then it may just be approval to work on a machine or meet some particular industry-based benchmark that allows that person to be approved to do a particular job role or job function. So competency-based training allows two pathways for assessment. Assessment through training, as we know, and we touched over the last week or two. And then obviously assessment only, which can include RPL, and that's that assessment only pathway, especially aligned with recognised prior learning, where, again, we spoke about it last week, but someone says, I think I can do this job, and we give them the assessments, or we go through an interview process, get them to go through the RPL document, trainer-led by us, and hopefully they can fill in the gaps, provide enough evidence that leads us to being able to hand them over their assessments, and they can demonstrate competence by just going through the assessment process without having to go through training. G'day, Tristan. So the basic steps for conducting assessment: it is necessary for assessors to brief the candidate, organise the assessment time and date, consult with the workplace if that's applicable, and gather the evidence. Really important. So within this, structure or template around an assessment plan, some of the early things that it's going to get us to record and work through as due process is that, it's necessary for assessors to brief the candidate. We let our candidates know what they're going to be assessed on, what it's all about. For us, for some of our blended delivery students, you kind of get that through the recorded webinars of what the assessment is. At the same time, and we've noticed this over the years, not always do our students read the very detailed instructions to students that we have in all of our assessments. But likewise, if you're having a practical assessment with us, then we will tell you this is what's going to happen today. This is what it's all about. Obviously, the organising of time and dates tends to happen well and truly before the event, on the lead up as a student is working through a particular topic. We'll say, hey, I think you're doing great. Let's try to aim for next week as your final day. We'll do a bit of training and we'll run into the assessment. So obviously that all gets agreed to. Like I said, if you're working within a workplace, and that needs to be definitely needs to be communicated, you may need to set up the conditions for the assessment process to be different from the actual training. You might have been training someone within a factory or a workplace, whatever the case may be. There could be interaction with other staff members, and that can be acceptable. But obviously, come the day of the assessment, you may want that space to be clear. Everyone knows that you got to leave Mary and John alone today for the next hour, because they're actually going through their assessment to be able to be ticked off on that particular competency. And obviously, the other basic step for conducting assessments is to gather the evidence, and that's via using the assessment instruments and the assessment tools, or the actual assessment instrument, and as a part of that, the assessment tools. Once we have created the environment and used our assessment processes, tools, and our assessment tool and our processes, and we've gathered the evidence, obviously we're going to have to evaluate that evidence and work out whether what the student has produced via an observation, or their written answers, or their verbal answers, or a portfolio of work, or a finished product, whatever we use whatever the evidence requirements are via the assessment process. Obviously, we need to evaluate that and deem whether we think it's, as a result of that, make a decision on whether we believe that person has demonstrated competence, give feedback, record the evidence, record the decision. So you guys will all see that at the front of all our assessments on page 2 or 3, we have the unit cover, or the assessment cover sheet, where your names are written down, your student numbers. There's all the little tick boxes of what particular evidence is required for that assessment. So there'll be a tick box of yes, has it been attached? And on the right-hand side, it'll have a C, or have an S, an SC, and whatever the case may be, we'll have something that says either satisfactory, not satisfactory, or non-applicable, or COM, C, NC for not competent, and NA, or whatever the case may be. So we'll have that ability to record that, Underneath that, we'll have the bits where we sign and where possibly you sign. And then we'll have, not only will we have the recording of the evidence, so the little bits and pieces that we tick off saying that, yes, you've passed this, and yes, you've done that, and yes, you handed in this, and yes, that's attached. And then underneath that, we'll have the final decision for the whole unit of competence. So you'll notice that on those front pages of those cover sheets on our assessments, we have an ability to record your performance and your evidence against the individual different evidence gathering tools that we use. So it might be the questions plus the drive test plus the portfolio or whatever we've asked you to create. And then underneath that, we'll have a total ability to record the decision for the whole unit of competence. And that's important to understand, that we've got those other little boxes that we tick along going, yep, 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 no, yep. And then we have the final decision that is made as a result of that. And all that's recorded goes into your folders, and then they're uploaded through a couple of different systems that are used within the vocational education and training sector in Australia for RTOs and TAFEs to record students' results. We don't use VetTrack. Do we use VetTrack, Alex? I'm a little bit lost now between some of our partners, well, not partnerships, but some of our working relationships with other RTOs. We use, I should know, that's terrible. Feel free. Oh, we use WiseNet. Thank you, Alex. I knew it wasn't VetTrack. We use a program called WiseNet. VetTrack's another one. And these recording of decisions and the uploading of that to the National Register, so to speak, they have to be used by approved systems. And there's deadlines associated with all that sort of stuff that we need to do. But it's a very important part of the quality assurance processes in the whole assessment process, that the trainers go through, do all this stuff, tick all the boxes, goes into the office, and they record those up onto WiseNet or VetTrack. An assessment plan is a document that outlines learning outcomes and program objectives. An assessment plan allows relevant personnel to see at a glance how the assessment will be structured, what is involved, and the assessment criteria against which candidates will be assessed. So exactly that. I don't really even need to recap on that. I think it's pretty straightforward of what it's saying there. But as I was saying, it's a template that allows us to get a very clear overall look and understanding of what needs to be created and done, and against what we're wanting to deem someone competent in. So when planning for assessment, assessors need to define the task. So really ask ourselves, what do they need to do? Or what do they need to produce to be deemed competent within this unit or workplace, or whatever the case may be. Work out the steps, how we're going to get this to happen. Develop procedures, develop the tools themselves, consult and confirm with others, reflect on it and evaluate and adjust the plan, and then consider validation methods. The important thing is that steps 1 to 4 tend to be done very internally within the training organisation. You will then, and should, as a part of your process of creating any assessment, especially if you're working with an RTO where you are creating assessments that are going to be put up for audit and all that kind of stuff, you need to actually show and demonstrate where you've consulted with industry. So you need to go out and organise these meetings with industry. I think I've touched on them before. Yeah, you need to go out to industry, meet with people, and sometimes it can be a little bit difficult, but you've got to chase up people within industry that are happy to sit down and spend an hour or two with you, show them and walk them through your assessments, and show them how it's going to work, what you're going to get the people to do, get any feedback from them. If they have any feedback suggesting improvements in any areas, you've got to reflect on that, show how you'll adjust your version 2 of the assessment, adjust the plan accordingly, and then move on to what we call the validation method, which is the next subject within the assessment stream that we'll learn in the next week or two. And validation is the process where we just really make sure we go through a benchmarking process where we really check that our assessment tool meets all the criteria that we're saying it's going to, and it does the job that it's going to as a result of, it's a part of a quality assurance process. So we define the task, we work out the steps, we develop the procedures, we create the assessment, known as the tool, we consult with others within internal and external, reflect on that feedback, improve it as we can, and then go off and validate it. Go through a structured process that ticks all the boxes, making sure everything is right. Why assessment is necessary, which tasks the candidates will be required to perform, your assessment, your student instructions and your assessor instructions, under what conditions those tasks will be performed, what resources will be required, what methods and tools will be used, and how the assessment results will map against the relevant learning outcomes. Performance. Really important things. Why is the assessment necessary? What tasks we're actually going to get these people to do? Under what conditions exactly? Is it simulated? Is it within the workplace? What needs to be performed? What are we actually going to require to make this happen? It's no use saying to people we're going to take you on a drive test and not have a car. What methods and tools we're going to be using? Is it just going to be questions and answers? Is it going to be direct observation? Do we have checklists? Do we need, all those sorts of things. And then exactly then obviously through that kind of validation process, how we go through a mapping process where we look at our assessment, our questions, our activities, and see how that maps against that unit of competence and the elements of performance criteria, and more importantly, the evidence requirements for that unit of competence, making sure that we tick off all the boxes in an attempt to have this assessment get students doing what they need to do for them to prove that they are competent, and we can award them a qualification. The plan will indicate what the expectations are with regard to the standards, procedures, and outcomes. So, by the end of this assessment, students shall demonstrate an ability to make 7 widgets within 7 minutes with no errors. What form of feedback will be given and when it will be given. So whether it's verbal feedback at the time, written feedback within 24 hours, or written verbal feedback straight away. What the results of the assessment will achieve. So is it an assessment that will deem overall competence to a qualification or a unit of competence? Or are the results of this assessment just several small steps within a bigger picture of deeming competence for a unit or a qualification? So, like I was saying, sometimes you'll have employers paying for training, and as a part of that, the reporting of those training results, especially when you think about things like apprenticeships and traineeships, you will be reporting the results of the assessment processes, not just through the agreed lines of how we normally report students' progression through courses through the government or official vet methods, but also you'll be probably reporting back to employers. So all that needs to be worked out. Regardless of the type of assessment, an assessment plan is necessary, and those who are conducting assessment must accurately interpret and plan any relevant assessment system policies and procedures. They must also be aware of organisational, legal and ethical requirements to be compiled when conducting assessment, and that's obviously under the principles of assessment, and we've talked about those. Obviously, guys, when we are looking at creating policies and procedures to make sure there is a fair, valid, reliable, sufficient assessment, that, again, if we're working in conjunction with any organisations, that we're aware of any of their requirements. And within that last assessment, we ask you to define some of the legal ramifications that need to be considered when creating assessments. So especially things like the Sexual Discrimination Act, Racial Discrimination Act, access and equity stuff that, we've got to make sure our assessments do not discriminate against people that have disability or on racial grounds or gender or whatever the case may be. And sometimes even within that, if you're creating assessments to do with a particular area, then you need to make sure and research that there isn't any specific legislation, especially around OH&S. OH&S is always going to be a part of, it's going to be legislation that you always need to keep in the back of your mind when creating assessments. Obviously, the ability to maintain a safe environment, meeting the requirements of occupational health and safety is just paramount. But sometimes you'll have specialised particular rules. So again, if we were taking it back to driver training, if you are doing any type of training within, say, for instance, the heavy vehicle sector, and you were working with and training people on the road, doing interstate truck driving. Well, obviously, your assessment processes would have to comply with fatigue laws, or what's known as the NHVR, the National Heavy Vehicle Register, and all the legislation in there about fatigue and the hours that drivers are allowed to drive and the time they have to have out of their cabin and of their truck when resting and all that sort of stuff. So quite often, when you are creating assessments, you need to think about the relevant legislation that may come with that. Obviously, for Tristan, you are working within, obviously, trade, so you might have particular union rules or worksite rules or workplace rules that, even rules pertaining to different work sites. You might have, like I said, obviously you'll have different OH&S rules. I know you work with some different, I think you work with some different trades, not just plumbers. So I'm guessing that there would be legislation and industry award agreements and all that kind of stuff that may sometimes need to be considered when conducting or creating assessments. I know Alex and I, when we did work with the MFB, obviously the MFB has a really strong union. It was an absolute pleasure teaching the guys and all that sort of stuff, but they have a very strong union. So it was very strict on when we created the training and the assessment processes, very, very strict on us making sure all those assessments fitted in within their work hours, so to speak, or the way their days are structured with their breaks and stuff like that. You can get out into and train some private industry or whatever the case may be, or small industries, and you'll have much more flexibility on when you can run things and whatever. Then you'll get into something as highly structured and unionized as the Metropolitan Fire Brigade, and all of a sudden there's all those sorts of rules about industrial relations need to be considered. At the end of the day, you'll need to be well organised and prepared. And it's as simple as that. We've talked about that. An assessment process that is planned, organised, and works well, and has students creating the evidence that they need to create and all that kind of stuff is just awesome. It's so good. Cool. Chapter 2, Assessment Tools. Tools. Assessment tools are the instruments and procedures used to gather and interpret evidence of competence. The instrument is the activity or the specific questions used to assess competence by the selected method, and an assessment instrument could be supported by a profile of acceptable performance and decision-making rules or guidelines to be used by assessors. So what does that mean? So when you receive one of our assessments, or you download one of our assessments from the student portal, that is only part of, in actual fact, the whole assessment tool. The full version of that assessment, which is known what we call the assessor version or trainer version, has many more pages in it than the ones that you deal with. And sometimes you'll notice it'll say, normally I think the footers will adjust in their page numbers, but you might sometimes realize, you'll look down and go, oh my God, there's 48 pages to this assessment, but I only seem to have 22. All those other pages will be pages dedicated to information for the assessor. So, the assessor more than the trainer. Quite often not quite often, in every one of our assessment tools, our full assessment tools, you'll have the front page, you'll have all those the following cover pages with unit outlines and whatever. And then for each particular instrument that we're going to use to assess you guys, there'll actually first of all be a set of general rules that tells the assessor, this is like the overriding principles of the assessment. Cool. I saw your message too, Tristan. There's plenty of sort of overall guiding rules on how the assessment process needs to take place. And then when it gets down to the individual assessment tasks that we've chosen, even though you guys get to see and read the instructions to the student, what we've actually removed out of that is the instructions to the assessor. So there could be 2, 3, 4 pages of information telling the assessor, this is how you need to do your job. And obviously that's really important under the principles of assessment, because if we didn't have a set of guidelines telling the assessor, this is how you need to do it, this is when you're going to do it, this is what you should be looking for and all that sort of stuff, how could we, under the principles of assessment, meet our obligations? How could we provide you guys with fair, reliable assessments if there was no infrastructure in place telling our assessors this is how you must do it every time, regardless? That's our quality assurance. It makes sure that our assessments are reliable, and reliable assessments tend to be fair and don't discriminate, whatever the case may be. And it won't matter whether you're doing an assessment on a Monday morning or a Friday afternoon. Everything that is required by the assessor and everything that is required by you will always be the same. And therefore, as an organisation, we can be confident that we're providing you guys with an assessment process and an ability for you to gather your qualifications in a environment that is meeting the principles of assessment. Procedures are the information or instructions given to the candidate and the assessor about how an assessment is to be conducted and recorded. We'll also have things like model answers. So all those empty boxes in our version of those assessments, we actually have to create, when we create an assessment, we actually must also, on top of that, include the correct answers or the model answers. So in all of our assessments, if you were to see the trainer version or the assessor's version, all those boxes would be filled in with model answers. The check boxes, all those checklists and observation tools would have desired outcomes or desired observations, and that way there's a benchmark again for whether I'm assessing you or Alex was assessing you or Ondavir or any one of our other staff, that you would be a part of a fair and reliable process. To assess competence, it is necessary to utilize a range of tools designed to gather appropriate evidence. Assessment tools are the testing instruments that are used to gather and interpret evidence. An assessment tool contains instructions to the participants explaining what evidence is required, the conditions under which the evidence will be gathered, and how it will be judged. Assessment tools form part of the bank of resources used for effective and safe assessment practice in a sector where assessment is conducted within a quality assurance framework known as the AQTF. I think I might have asked you guys today what the AQTF is, or I might have asked you what the AQF was and what ASQA was. Can't remember if I actually put the AQTF in that little text message questionnaire to you. But yeah, so obviously within the AQTF, we need to meet their requirements. You as an assessor must understand how to apply the tools you will use. So that's your instructions to the assessor. The capacity of the tools that you will use, so they'll be create sufficient evidence. How to adapt them to meet particular requirements of each assessment, their flexibility, how to ensure that the tools used will ensure a valid and fair assessment. So there you go. We've got our principles of assessment there: sufficiency, flexibility, validity, and fairness. Assessment activities are designed to enable assessment against the performance criteria or a group of performance criteria within each element. So in general, the assessment activities might consist of questions assessing knowledge, a demonstration of skills, case studies, practical activities. The responses to the assessment activities might be drawn from the theory, / information contained in the learning resource, additional reading and research, supplementary materials provided by the trainer and assessor, and practical experience. So if we're to sort of go back and bring those again together, we've got our generalized activities, and especially for those who do our assessments, we're normally always going to have some form of question and answer. There tend to be, we have a lot of research-based questions, really, where we ask you to sort of go off and find some information. Or we ask you to draw on information that you have acquired through the learning activities or the practical activities that we've put together. We obviously have a demonstration of skills through the practical parts to our assessments. They tend to be one-on-one activities. We don't tend to do many group practical activities. Most of our stuff tends to be one-on-one. There'll be small bits and pieces. We don't do a whole lot of case studies. There is case studies in some of the stuff that we do, but not really in the areas where you guys train with us too much. We do use case studies from time to time, but not as much in the qualifications that you guys have probably done with us. Though, if you were to do, say, for instance, the first aid course with us, plenty practical activities within groups and individual. So response, and that's obviously to follow on from that, as you guys know, with our stuff, a lot of our answers can be found in the supplementary materials provided by us. So we create the learning materials that can quite often align to the information that you're going to need to be able to do the job properly. And because we target that information to your end goal, your end job role, obviously that then ties it into the assessment process and what we're asking you to answer or prove understanding of or do as an activity within the assessment or the assessment processes. Every now and again, as you know, you might have to do a little bit of research, but again, for us, a lot of the stuff is within our learning material, and obviously any practical experience. When we have a look here at the types of activities or what an assessment tool can have or have within it, or what this picture showing here really is all the evidence gathering techniques that you can use within your assessment tool. So the activities or the methods that we can use are obviously observation, more the assessment method, so to speak. So within our assessment tool, we could have particular activities or instruments that are made for us to be able to, gather evidence by observation, verbal questioning, written questioning, third-party reports, self-assessment, portfolios of work, structured activities, or integrated assessment. And we'll sort of go through these points in the next few slides, and we'll cover all these. So again, your assessment tool, that whole document that will have different types of assessment instruments, which are the bits and pieces or the methodologies that we use in order to gather our evidence. These are the different ways that we can create instruments to bring about these types of evidence. So obviously observation, we're looking, as we've talked about, observation, we're looking at people's particular people's ability to perform tasks. Obviously verbal questioning and written questions, questioning are looking at people's understanding of particular competencies or the ability to understand what they're doing. So just to watch them is not good enough, but to watch them and make sure that they understand understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, so to speak. So not just anyone can do something, but making sure that they understand why they're doing it is probably more paramount to being able to deem someone competent. Using observation tools. If the assessment tool being used supports the observation method, it is most likely based on a checklist style instrument. While this form of instrument is useful in documenting details of specific evidence requirements, it is not enough to support competence. Such tools tend to emphasize the pieces and not necessarily the whole, so may need to be backed up by another tool, such as a list of questions. And people, and we've got little jokes about it on our website and that, but the old tick and flick, you've heard people say, oh man, I went to do this course and all it was a tick and flick. So there would be some sort of checklist, and an assessor sits there and just goes, yep, no, yep, you're passed. When you go to audit and you have an exorbitant amount or a large amount of checklists that you're meant to be using to deem people competent, it's like a red flag or a red flag to a bull, so to speak. It sets off all the warning bells, because quite often creating checklists, even though they are important, and checklists done properly are a lot of hard work. If you were to look at the checklist that Alex created for our SIS course, the course for fitness trainers, so to speak, they're very, very detailed checklists. They really set out in great detail what the assessor is looking for before they can tick yes, they're good. The greatest trick a lot of people would do is they get a unit of competence. They grab the elements of performance criteria and put them in boxes. They just cut and paste the elements of performance criteria into boxes. They cut and paste the evidence requirements, especially the critical aspects of evidence and the critical aspects of knowledge, and they leave 2 empty boxes to the side and go yes or no. And that's meant to be your assessment tool, that you has done it. That is not good enough for auditors. They're like, no, that is that is by far not good enough to provide a structure that an assessor really knows what they're looking for, what specific parts of that person's task or evidence producing material or task, whatever the case may be. It's just too broad and it's too ambiguous, and they are not happy with it. And yet I could show you books and books and books, books and books and books of old learner guides where trainers or where these people that created these learner guides, where you'd purchase them and you'd use them to teach students, and they're just full of checklists at the back, and you're meant to just tick and flick your way through to, getting people to pass, and not good enough. So there was a huge emphasis to improve that process. Some tips to keep in mind when using an observation tool for demonstrated evidence are: be unobtrusive, but ensure the candidate is aware of what you are doing. And especially for those workplace trainers, you're there, you're watching someone doing the job out on the factory floor or in some sort of workplace. You don't want to be all in the client's face, but they need to know that you're there, and not to forget that you're there and you're doing your job. Be alert and ready to note observations, and especially intervene in any safety concerns. While you're making notes or recording performance, remember to look at the whole outcome as set out in the benchmark, not just the individual parts. And that's important to never sort of forget, even though a really good checklist has those little individual pointers that you're looking for, always never forget to ask yourself, is the person pulling off the job? Are they doing the job? And that sometimes can provide a bit of clarity beyond all the little individual bits which are meant to provide the clarity. Sometimes you just need to simplify it a little bit. Make sure that they're making those small things, but ask yourself at the end of the day, is the person doing the job? And you'll get some sort of, better assessment outcome. Address the evidence requirements as defined, not some other aspect of the performance, such as how well someone presents, unless presentation skills are part of the performance requirements. And that's really important. And it's like, and a classic case for that, and sorry again, Tristan, to go to our driving instructors, but a classic case for us is that in the main, assessment in the driver training qualification, the develop safe car driving behaviours and others, where our students take us out as a learner driver, like we say to all of our students, write notes, come prepared, bring training aids. If you got something drawn, if you need to draw something, draw something. If you need to bring notes, cheat notes, even when we train you, we used to say to people, write as much as you can down, because your final assessment, this final assessment for this unit that kind of proves that you're doing the job, is not a memory test. I don't expect you to remember every road rule and every bit of criteria and all the things that we've taught you over the course and tell me them verbatim off the top of your head, rather than saying, hey, Cameron, have a look, here's my notes. This is what I want you to do. It's not a memory test. And for us, you being able to remember everything and say it verbally actually we don't find that impressive anyway, because unless my learning style, which we're going to talk about in the coming weeks, actually suits receiving that information in that one way, you're actually doing me a disservice anyway. So a classic case for that is that, as impressive as it may seem, to come to that final assessment and be able to do everything verbally without using notes or whatever, for us, it actually is not impressive. We would rather you demonstrate an ability to draw on different resources and make sure you're accurate in your information and all that kind of stuff, rather than trying to impress us with a great memory. So you need to make sure that you're addressing the evidence requirements. That final assessment, there is no extra reward for being a memory test. It's not a part of the requirements. So really, we're not going to judge you on that anyway. Using verbal questioning tools. These tools are very useful in guiding the gathering of evidence to address the required knowledge or to ascertain how someone would apply skills in different situations, such as an emergency or to rectify an error. They can be used in conjunction with most other methods. So verbal questioning can be fantastic. It makes for a very participatory assessment process, which is awesome. You really do want open dialogue going through an assessment process. If the assessment that process or that approach doesn't cram the learner or cause them unnecessary stress or anything like that, because sometimes people just don't want to talk while they're doing something. But if it's a part of the competency and the dimensions of competence that you can sort of do the task and deal with someone to the side of you or whatever the case may be, then obviously verbal questioning and that interaction is awesome. However, you need to know when to pull back, when to do it, when it's when the process of you trying to gather verbal answers from the client is compromising the whole assessment process and the principles of assessment. If it's pushing someone too far where it's no longer becoming a fair and valid assessment, especially a fair assessment, then we need to be able to recognize that and pull back from it. If you're using a prepared tool for verbal questioning, it should contain the questions you need to ask and some notes or summaries of appropriate responses. So again, it should have model answers that doesn't matter if the student doesn't say exactly the same way, but as long as you can go, oh yeah, what he said there is covering that. It's not the exact words I'd use, but they're definitely showing that they understand the topic. Fantastic. And you need to understand that model answers don't mean that person has to give you those words exactly, as long as it's just within the framework and it does definitely demonstrate an understanding. Fantastic. You should be prepared to add questions of your own in response to answers provided by the candidate. Everyone will know that if they do the final assessment with me, I'm always adding extra questions to deliberately delve into your world of knowledge. So, you might be, oh, look, Cameron, as you approach a stop sign, you need to make sure you come to a complete stop. And I'll be like, why? Oh, well, and I'll be like, well, does it matter for the test? Does it matter for road law? Why is it safe if I don't do it? So I deliberately will ask more and more questions, making you provide me with the evidence required to demonstrate to me that you have a thorough understanding and I can deem you competent. And everyone knows that I'd always be a pain in the butt with that type of assessment, especially deliberately asking verbal questions to delve into your knowledge base, allowing you to provide the evidence. Be wary that some candidates may not be confident in expressing themselves verbally, especially in an assessment context. Allow opportunity to supplement initial responses with further evidence by asking additional questions and offering prompts, but not leading questions. And that's important. Sometimes when you really want someone to do well, or you've got an emotional investment within a process, it's really easy to use leading questions and kind of give the people the answer before they provide it. And students, pick up that easily. They'll not deliberately, but it's quite simple. And all of us have been in that situation, even in high school. Bear with me for a second. Sneezed. All of us have been in that situation probably at some stage in high school where we've had a nice teacher trying to lead us to the answers that they want to hear so they can tick us off as finishing something. And we know how to deliberately kind of stall on our answers, waiting for that overeager teacher to come in with the answer. So then we go, yes, that's what I was going to say, and all that kind of stuff. We're all very good at doing that. And as a trainer, it takes a lot of discipline not to get into leading questions that really kind of provide the student with the answer before they give it to you, because it, like I said, it can be quite often considered an agenda subconsciously for you as a trainer. I want this person to pass and I want to be able to move on and get to the next person. And all of a sudden you're given leading questions and you're not really at all assessing someone's competence. Ask questions in simple and concise language that the candidates can understand. Repeat the question in a different form if it is clear that they do not understand your first approach, or use pictures or diagrams to further explain your question. And that's what I was talking about before with the whole, a little bit different, but the whole thing about it not being just a verbal approach, a memory test, or a verbal approach to the assessment process, that you pretending to be a trainer with us, asking us a question as a student, that you're able to use diagrams if you need to, or re-explain the question. Sometimes, again, it's funny to watch people, you pretend you don't understand, so they just say the same thing slower. That doesn't always necessarily make for a easier to understand situation for your for your student. Remember, if you need to reword your question, take a minute or two if you need to, even if you need to write it down and then try to rewrite the question physically to find a different way to say the same question. It is quite interesting, and it's just a natural human habit. If you'll find that someone will ask a question, and if you say, "Sorry, I don't get that," they'll just tend to say it slower, or really just change one or two words in the order of how they say it. They don't really change the words themselves. They just change the order of the same words, hoping that that will provide a better understanding of what's required, and it doesn't. It doesn't at all. Use an appropriate tone of voice, which will not discourage the candidates or make them nervous. Used to always get annoyed at that one a little bit with testers, Vic Roads testers. I used to be right onto that if I did not like their tone of voice and I thought they were completely compromising the principles of assessment. Then I had no problems getting them to publicly, in front of their boss, explain to us how we can take this person out onto a drive test, given that they've completely compromised the assessment process through their tone of voice, deliberately making my client nervous. And yeah, used to have great pleasure in letting testers know that when it comes to my clients and them dealing with me, that that our understanding was that, or our acceptance of their behaviour was only going to be at the highest standard. Make sure you ask all the prepared questions in this tool so the candidates have the same opportunity to provide their verbal evidence as anyone else. Again, making sure you're consistent. Ensure you record their responses accurately. Make notes of the additional questions you have asked and the responses. These days, obviously, recording stuff on your phone or whatever the case may be is a great way to record that and then go back later and write that in a little bit more detail if you're not the quickest writer, whatever the case may be. But otherwise, just afford yourself the time, write down the notes or some sort of way that you can accurately record it come time to hand in that assessment tool and keep it as evidence. Questioning tools. These tools serve the same purpose as verbal tools, but may be more appropriate to use in some circumstances. This should have been determined when developing the assessment plan. The main difference between the two is that written questions cannot be easily changed during delivery of the assessment tool. Verbal questioning allows for a more nuanced delivery, and written questioning is more static. Some tips when using written questioning tools. Be sure sufficient time is provided for responses. Be prepared to clarify any specific questions for the candidates before or while they are answering the written questions. If using a computer for questioning, make sure the candidate knows how to use the relevant hardware and software, and consider alternatives if the written question format is unsuitable. So from the top, make sure if you're going to do a time-based assessment, a good old test, your time starts now, you need to make sure that you allow enough time. And especially that can be really important in that through that whole process of planning the assessment and the training, but especially the assessment process, that you identify your client base, you identify your learners' characteristics. Are they English first language? Are they educated people? Are they coming from a low base on either of those things? Are they people that have been in the workplace for a long time? Are they people just entering this workforce? So all that should be considered, and also the types of questions you're asking. If you're asking for questions that require research, then you need to allow sufficient research time. You'll know with ours, even though most of our assessments can be provided within an exam environment, we don't do that. We do it as open book assessments done in your own time. Obviously, point 2, be prepared to clarify any specific questions. As we tell everyone, whenever you get stuck on any question at any stage, you always contact us. I think we tell everyone, once you get to 10 to 15 minutes or something on a question, if you still don't understand it, it's time to get in contact with us. There is no benefit to you staring at a screen or staring at a piece of paper for half an hour, 45 minutes, thinking, what the hell does this mean? No, it's time to clarify for us. And as you know, where we can, we have recorded webinars, which most people don't know, but they're there. And we've talked about it in the past. We have recorded webinars explaining what each question means anyway, to help you do that. But most times people don't know they're there. And like I said, obviously consider the alternatives. That can be whether that's moving across to open text answers to multiple choice, true or false, or whatever the case may be. I am back, and hopefully things will be better. Using third-party reports. If part of the evidence is to be gathered using a third-party report, you need to properly prepare the third party. For example, if the third party is using an observation tool, provide instructions on how to use it. Our last major audit for the Cert 3 in fitness, Alex's ability to his checklists, the instructions to the assessors, and the instructions to the third-party people, because within that SIS qualification, people obviously go out and work in gyms, and the so-called gym manager has to tick off particular people that they've learned how to, set up the machines in the morning and turn off the lights of a nighttime and all that kind of stuff. His instructions to those people were mightily impressive. They were really, really good. And it came up, she mentioned it several times, that it was probably some of the best observation tools and instructions to not only the assessors, but the instructions to the third party observers that she had ever seen. It was really clear that these gym managers would completely understand what was required by them and what they were looking for and what was necessary for them to make sure that the assessment processes that those people are going through for the whole qualification were not going to be compromised once they got involved. You also need to ensure the candidates are aware of who will be assessing them and providing the third-party report. That's important. Hey, Jim, just letting you know, Bill, the boss you can't stand, he's the one that's going to be assessing you, or Fred, the guy that loves you, he's going to be the one assessing you. You wouldn't quite say it like that, obviously. But yeah, so you need to let them know when there's a third-party person involved. Ensure that the candidates agree with your selection of the third party and make alternative arrangements if there are any issues or concerns over a particular supervisor carrying out this role. And that happens, in workplaces. We don't all like everyone we work for or work with or work above, so to speak. So need to make sure that all those things are good and there's no history or bad blood or anything like that. Provide the third party with key responses or performance thresholds they should expect from the candidates, and have a time frame for the return of the information. Self-assessment tools. Providing candidates with self-assessment tools. These tools are very useful in gaining an immediate picture of the candidate's competence for recognition of prior learning purposes or before particular learning activities. Self-assessment tools can be used in conjunction with other assessment tools. If you're using self-assessment tools as part of the evidence gathering process, you need to ensure that the candidates are fully briefed and clear about what they need to do when responding to the tool. In some circumstances, you could be available to answer any questions or respond to any issues while they are completing it. We find that, again, especially with RPL, and you've heard me say this before, we've probably moved more to an assessor-led RPL process. Again, it used to be common practice that if you wanted to go through an RPL process, the RTO would give you a massive document and say, here, go for it on your own. Very, very difficult to do. No one would do it. RTOs would then say, well, you're better off just doing the training. It can still happen anyway, even though it's a trainer-led process. But if you are going to have people using self-assessment tools, then you need to do the right thing by them and spend time with them, briefing them about how the tool works, what they're going to need to be doing, the gathering process, the types of evidence that they're going to have to produce. Even though the responsibility of the evidence gathering is on the applicant, the person who's putting in for the RPL, definitely you still need to spend that time. And like I said, it was a funny type of process when we first joined the industry. It was almost like people that wanted to go through RPL were treated like lepers. And, and I remember the exact words would be, and people that trained us would be on the phone or in an interview, and we'd be sitting there. Alex and I would be sitting here listening to this person walking someone through an RPL process, and their exact words would be, if you're going to go through RPL, the evidence gathering is up to you. You're the one who's going to have to produce it. Here's a document, go away. So it was virtually like, we're going to not help you, and you're going to have to create this yourself. and probably because at that stage, RTOs and even TAFEs were making the mistake of discounting RPL. As you know, here at ITS, we do not discount on RPL. Direct credit transfer, when someone has the matching qualification, yeah, absolutely, we discount on that. But RPL, we don't, because RPL is a difficult, time-consuming process, and especially our trainer-led RPL process is quite involved, and it takes me. I can wipe off days and days and days of work doing RPLs for people, so you can't discount on that. And I think people got mixed up with, well, if we're not training these people, we're going to have to discount the enrollment fee, but everyone was still going, but I'm still going to have to do a day's work or 2 days work. So if it's actually easy for this person just to turn up to class, because I'm going to be teaching the other people anyway. So if this person turns up, they come to class, I can give them the assessment like everyone else. It's better for me. So it became a highly discourageable process for those who wanted to do it properly. And for those who wanted to use it, as in the RTOs that wanted to use it for quick money, because they'd still kind of claim it through the government funding process, it became all too easy. They'd just give them those tick sheets, and people would go along and say, yes, I do this, yes, I do that, yes, I do this, and they tick away, hardly provide any evidence. The RTO would put it in as these people have RPL. They'd claim the funding for it. Back then, you could claim RPL funding, so the whole thing was totally compromised. If people didn't want to do it properly because it would take too much time and they were discounting and not earning enough money, and then the others who didn't do it properly were compromising the whole system anyway. So if you're going to do self-assessment tools, spend the time with people, walk them through the process, work with them all the way through, but you charge just the same. Portfolios. For a portfolio of evidence, give guidance on your expectations as to the type and amount of evidence you will need the candidates to provide and how it should be presented. This means that candidates can provide sufficient evidence without going overboard. If the portfolio tool is designed well, this should be clear. With us doing some subjects or some courses, you end up with a portfolio of work. We certainly used to get our guys to provide much bigger portfolios of work through the process of our courses, especially when we used to run a 2-month-long full-time course for the driver training and into the TAE and everything like that, or we used to go for more than 2 months. Our students would leave us with a huge portfolio of work, all as part of the small steps in each assessment, but they'd end up creating a portfolio of work. We didn't mark them as a portfolio, so it wasn't like we said, here is, you do all this work for us. We're not assessing you in any other way bar the portfolio of work you create at the end. It wasn't assessed like that. You just probably as a byproduct created a portfolio of usable documents and templates that you could go out and use in the workplace. Whereas truly using a portfolio would be that we would have these people creating all these documents and all that, and we wouldn't kind of be marking anything through that process, or only marking certain parts of the process, and then final judgment of competence would be based on that portfolio of work. So in that situation, obviously, when you have people creating work that's going to be their portfolio, to which you are going to deem them competent or not competent, there needs to be some really clear communication going on, so everyone knows what's required, because it's nothing worse, because quite often portfolios are holistic assessment. It's assessment that is going to be taking place at the end of the learning process, and at the end of the course. Quite often portfolio work is you hand it in on the last day of class, so to speak, or you've finished your course, and 2 weeks later you've got a 2-week window to hand in that work. So the whole course is done and dusted, and then you trot in with your portfolio and hand it in. You want to make sure that your trainers have totally ensured that you have understood what was required before you get to that too late factor. Be careful about the capacity of the candidates to provide necessary evidence. For example, there may be limitations or access issues for some candidates when you're requesting them to provide documents from their workplace. You need to be aware. Organisational, legal or regulatory requirements such as privacy may kick in. I know today with Navpreet, I was walking her through another assessment for another qualification, and I was mentioning to her about, what you need to do is, go to work, grab some documents, and have a look at them and make sure that you study those documents, those procedures, and you're going to provide what you believe could be an improvement to it or whatever. Obviously, if Navpreet was to come to me tomorrow and say, "Hey, look, they won't let me take any of our organisational documents because of legal requirements or privacy or whatever the case may be," then I'd have to provide her with some policy and procedure that she can use in a simulated environment. So, yeah, today I said to her, "Yep, go off and find a policy and procedure from your workplace, whether it's induction or something, have a look at it, suggest an improvement." But obviously, like I said, she comes back tomorrow and goes, "Look, couldn't do it. Boss wouldn't let me go to the, download it, or wouldn't let me go to the filing cabinet." Then I need to provide Navpreet with an alternative. Structured activities. When using tools for structured activities, such as simulation or a project, make sure the instructions and specifications are clear and that you are available to answer questions during the life of the activity. This might mean being present while the activity is being conducted, or being available personally or electronically if the activity is being conducted over a period of time. Issues to consider when using these types of tools can include the following. Is the structured activity appropriate for every candidate in the group? There may be certain needs, individual or otherwise, that may need to be accommodated when designing or adapting the assessment tool. Most people know structured activities as group, activities. Most people hate group activities because if you're the control freak who wants to do well, you'll tend to take on the whole project and do everything. And the people that are smart enough to realize that you care far more than they do, they'll sit back and let you do everything. So I know with both my children, they used to hate doing group activities because they knew they never were strong enough not to take on the whole work, because they'd want to do well and they'd want to, for no other reason but to want to do well, that they'd end up doing everyone's work because they just didn't trust everyone. Now that's an issue within itself, and that's not a good thing at all. And there's skills and tools to learn for them through life, how not to become a victim to that and how to, do a better job. But even for us as adults, that occurs. We used to see it quite often when we get to do in the coming weeks, when we do the validation group activity, which you will do in small groups. I will definitely be looking at making sure that we don't have particular individuals doing everything. We make sure that everyone's doing a fair share. Obviously, when we used to do that course within a TAFE environment, we'd have 16 students in the classroom or 15 students in the classroom. Quite often for us, especially within that course, you could see those with the stronger LLN, language literacy numeracy, especially the English first language students, would tend to want to take over. And those with English second language kind of suited them sometimes to let that person take over. So we'd be really constantly through that process on the groups, making sure that everyone's contributing. And it's something that you need to be well aware of if you're going to run structured activities, that the processes you got involved, the portioning out of the work is even, and that it is quite difficult for people to take over and do everyone's work. And somehow you've got little evidence gathering techniques involved where you're making sure that each individual is contributing to it. Again, auditors can be a little bit wary of a lot of structured activities because they'll be, if you're watching 10 people at once do something, how can you really accurately tell that everyone is competent? I know, again, a lot of training companies, and even though Alex and I were at a TAE government, what could I say? It was like a PD, like a professional development day for RTOs with the new TAE qualification coming. And the lady was like, we love, several of the trainers were like, we love doing structured activities. And all the auditors in the room virtually, I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Up, but when the dog sees squirrels, like squirrel, and they all go dead straight, stiff, and their ears point to the sky. All the auditors in the room, it was like someone said squirrel. They all like structured activity. They were right on alert because they're like, wait a second, if you've got 10 people going at once, how can you really look at everyone and make sure that they're deeming them competent? That's very hard to do. Especially if it's complex tasks. You really do have to ask yourself, if it's a practical complex task and lots of people doing different things, how can you as a trainer, especially early on in your career, be looking at all those people and deeming them competent? So you need to be a little bit wary of that, because it will be, again, another red flag to a bull in an audit. So you're going to have really clear structures in place, and maybe say that you have sufficient assessors. Like when you're doing a group activity, it's not just one assessor there might be several. And that will help the process. So managing the process at every step, making sure it runs as planned, especially when it involves a simulation, providing sufficient timelines to complete the activity through thoroughly and with confidence. This is particularly important in project work, where time will need to be dedicated to research. Integrated assessments. When confirming the assessment plan and organising assessments, consider any opportunities for integrated assessment activities. Integrated assessment is an approach to assessment that covers the grouping together or clustering of units of competency or parts of a unit of competency. So sometimes assessments and training naturally goes well clustered. You can cluster them together nicely, and it works really well. So when you create your assessment, you're going to integrate maybe several units of competence into that cluster, and you're going to assess, 2 or 3 units at once. Right now, I know Alex is writing some assessments for a clustering of units within a driver training qualification. There's a unit that is very comprehensive within a certain area, and then there's another unit that's like a watered down version of it. We don't kind of really know why they're both there, but it's going to be very easy for us to cluster those 2 units together to say that we're going to train them and assess them at the same time, and make sure that our assessments tick off all the boxes for both assessments through the mapping process and the validation process, because it just makes sense. It does not make sense to try to do them individually. While they're doing the first unit of competence, it just about covers off the second one completely. So why wouldn't we say, while we're assessing that one, we're going to assess that one at the same time? Care needs to be taken to establish what evidence is required for each unit of competency in the cluster by examining the units individually. You can then determine whether there is there's an opportunity to cluster units and use common evidence for assessment decisions. Lots of probably for us, we're not the greatest believers in clustering, but you'll have there are RTOs that specialize in clustering. It's how they make themselves very streamlined and very competitive. We're not great on it. We like to see people provide evidence individually, because we know that's what auditors love, and maybe we not pander to that, but maybe we consider that at times maybe a little bit too much, that we want each individual unit to very strongly stand alone in an audit, and that we wouldn't have any troubles with it. And that, unfortunately for you guys, you create a lot of evidence, not repeated, but similarities in evidence across several subjects, because they'll be asking for it. But we tend to rather err on your behalf, on you getting to do too much evidence sometimes, slightly, than not enough. Because again, if we cluster everything and we get audited and they go, no, none of these assessments create enough evidence, once upon a time, you would just get a rap over the knuckles, and they would say, well, that's not good enough. We're going to give you, a month to rectify this. We're going to come back in a month. We're going to audit you, and you better have new assessment tools that, gather the evidence for each individual unit better than what you've got, or your clustered units will have to individualize the evidence requirements better. But these days, and what we've seen with a lot of those dodgy RTOs, ASQA or the VRQA go into audits. They look at these assessments and they go, no, you have clustered these far too much. You have not gathered enough evidence. Not only are we going to wrap you over the knuckles and either deregister you or give you a month to rectify things, but based on what you've done here, there is no way that you could have deemed those people competent. So what happens is those students get a letter going, unfortunately, you studied with, well, I won't say any names because it's getting recorded, but some of those very once famous RTOs. And unfortunately, through the audit process, we've deemed that the assessment processes were not strong enough that they didn't meet the principles of assessment and the rules of evidence, and your qualification is being revoked. And that's the biggest thing that's hit probably our industry in the last 2 or 3 years, is that not only do RTOs doing the wrong thing, get fined and hit whatever, but they actually, for the poor old student, they actually go back and revoke the qualification. So quite often all of that means a loss of money for the RTO. So the RTO, if they use government funding, will be ordered to pay that back. So of course what they do is go into liquidation. They declare themselves bankrupt because they don't want to pay back, millions of squeens of dollars to the government. So they declare themselves bankrupt. And what happens for the poor old students is that they are left with no qualification and no one to get their money back off. We have a student that will be joining us over the next week or so. She's not here tonight. Having a similar issue to that, not quite as bad as that, but having a bit of an issue along those lines. So I'm sure that she'll be able to share her story with you in the coming weeks. But yeah, did a course finished, and obviously with them going into liquidation, they've got an issue there. But we know of plenty of people that not only lost their money, but lost their qualification because the RTOs tried to cluster the units so much, streamline the qualification so much that, you come in the morning, you learn till lunchtime, and we hand out the certificates in the afternoon. So if you integrate assessments, you may need to change the assessment tools and document these changes on the assessment plan. You'll also need to map the assessment tools against the relevant units of competency to demonstrate that the evidence requirements have been met. That's it, guys. We're done. We're done for tonight. Thank you for putting up with me. I had a massive migraine this afternoon. I bravely, being a male, it was touch and go. They thought they were going to have to call in the doctor and administer a lethal injection for me. But I apologize for tonight. I had a huge migraine, and I actually, just fired myself up to be able to do this for you. So I apologize for my performance. But if there's any questions, we'll throw the mics open and you can ask away. Otherwise...